Let the games officially begin. How's it going, Mets fans? It's Wardy here, and we're back at it with a breaking news late night live show here at right around midnight here, heading into December 2nd, which has come out over the past hour from many others, including Jeff Passan of ESPN, that yes, the Mets have signed veteran right-hander Frankie Montas to a 2-year, $34 million deal, which includes that player option. So in tonight's show, we're going to live react and break down all you need to know on this signing for the Mets. Why did David Stearns sign yet another former Milwaukee Brewer? What did the Mets see in the upside versus the downside of Frankie Montas as a former New York Yankee now arrives back to New York, this time not with the Bronx, but this time in Queens with the Mets in Flushing. So everybody, let me see your initial reactions in the comments down below. To all of our live viewers right now, we're going to deep dive to it, see everything you need to know on Frankie's Arsenal. Again, the upsides of this, what the Mets will likely adjust and change about his arsenal heading into the 2025 season. Why this is yet again another low-risk, high-reward pickup for the Mets, even with a man at right around 17 mil average annual value. We'll get into why this contract should not concern any fans when understanding the greater picture of the Mets and their ability to spend this and every single offseason. But how you doing, everybody? Thank you so much for taking the time tonight to chime in live on a replay. We appreciate you guys. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button as your first chime in. It's always appreciated, folks. As you guys can see right here, right now, all the numbers, all the stats on Frankie Montas, the 31-year-old right-hander. I know the ERA isn't pretty. Again, he had a roughly north of 5 ERA this past season and 30 starts with two teams there in the NL Central between the Cincinnati Reds and the Milwaukee Brewers. But there's upside here, and exactly the reason why I'm not freaking out about this signing, why I don't think this is a drastic overpay, is because of the confidence that David Stearns instilled in me after year one as president of baseball operations, the same way that he should instill at least some level of confidence into each and every one of you. Even if it doesn't work out in the end, even if Frankie Montas ends up being a DFA halfway through his contract, halfway through the season, the Mets will always be fine and figure things out on the pitching front. I have a lot of confidence on that front, and for good reason. I feel like you guys should be the same for various reasons. We see Matthew Martell with a $2 holla. Thank you so much for that. We see Billy Dottie with a $5 holla earlier saying this is a Stearns move to a T. Further confirms that starting pitching is going to cost an arm and a leg this offseason. More exciting moves ahead. Yes, you said that greatly, my friend. There are more exciting moves ahead, and this is hopefully the tip of the iceberg like many of you already alluded to. Ethan, great follower in here. Jason, how you doing? Joey, Scott A, John Rossi, longtime great follower and member here. Poppy Cap, how you doing? BC, going down the list. Dan Nugent, how are you doing? We got my man Josh, great member, going down the list here. Meeple, how are you? Nick Metz, hope you're doing fantastic. Jay St. John, how are you? Jimmy, how you doing? Jay's a Salad, great member, thank you for chiming in. Jacob, my amazing editor there on the X platform at the WardyNYM, how are you? Going down here, we got YF, we got Andres, we got Dan, we got Matthew, we got Juan Diaz, great member. We got my man K-Pop, how you doing? We got everyone in here. Christian, Tim, Giovanni, thank you so much for taking the time this evening. We appreciate you guys greatly. As you guys smash your like and subscribe button in our latest segment presented by BetUS, America's #1 sportsbook, but more on them later in the show, everybody. Let's deep dive the pros and the cons and everything in between as to why David Stearns made this move for one Frankie Montas. Now, let me start, everybody, by let's see those initial reactions, right? Lord Rage, Steve Long, great member. Michael Nealis, great member. How you guys doing? Drew, Robert, how you doing? Joey NYM chiming in. Steven Daba, James Blind, Mikey H. Oh, how are you? Hood Gauge, how you doing? Guys, I gotta ask all you guys watching live on a replay, what's the initial reaction here? Because I know from what I saw from a lot of fans there on X, the initial reaction and the common belief was, okay, I don't hate this move, but this is definitely an overpay in my opinion at 17 mil average annual value for a guy coming off of a less than impressive 2024 campaign. I understand that, but I also understand that this is an inflated pitching market, and similar to Luis Severino signing at that 1 year right around $13 million deal last year, where everyone and their mother felt like it was an overpay then, Severino hit beyond expectations, exceeded set expectations for the Mets and a healthy 2024 campaign. The Mets are banking on some similarities from the Luis Severino campaign in 2024 to what the Mets would be getting from Frankie Montas here in 2025. An above average velo thrower there, Montas, who's just looking more for some more stability with his fastball. And what do I love so much about him, and why does David Stearns love this pickup so much, and why is he banking big time all the way to a 2-year deal, including that player option? It is the S's, everybody, the triple S's. We say it on the platform all the time, but say it with me here. Splitty, sinker, slide piece. The triple S's are the most important S's because they have been a huge focal point for David Stearns, Jeremy Hefner, and their pitching lab that they have built over this past calendar year. Not only from the rotation, but certainly from the bullpen down, the Mets have had a heavy point of emphasis with guys that have, say, nasty sinkers, splitters, or one of a sweeper or a typical slider. Now you enter Frankie Montas, who's had some of the most success in his career, hammering the sinker heavy, the splitty as well. It looks like we're going to see more usage of that in 2025, but we'll deep dive further, not only his numbers, what we like versus what we don't like for per Fangraphs and Baseball Savant, and what we can potentially get out of him over the next couple years should he stay in this Mets rotation. TJ with the $10 howl says, do I think this means we are getting one more rotation lock starting pitcher or two, or better to put it, is Montas the 4 or the 5? I would definitely say that Frankie Montas as of now is your number 3 or number 4, but should you land more of an ace caliber starter for this rotation, and or should you land another depth piece, and that'll obviously change the complexion of where he's lined up. Because as we know, everybody, how this rotation currently stands is Kodai Senga, then you're going to have David Peterson, then you're going to have a lot of question marks already from there, right? You have Tyler McGill, you have Paul Blackburn that you could potentially defer to, obviously, but with Sean Manaea, Luis Severino, Jose Quintana, all wildcards in the free agent market, as things currently align, yes, Frankie Montas is your number 3, but I don't think the Mets have intentions for Frankie Montas to start the season as their number 3, even with the investment at $17 million of average annual value. I think that number 4 spot makes more than enough sense for him. I think number 5 is honestly too low in the pecking order where we can expect him to begin the season, but obviously this is barring changes to the rotation, as the Mets will inevitably look to add, whether it's to the likes of a Corbin Burns or to, say, a Sean Manaea and or Luis Severino reunion to either a higher or lesser degree, depending on who you talk to, the Walker Buehlers of the world, among others. The Mets have creative options in the free agent market that they can defer to, and as well as a trade market with the headlining piece in Garrett Crochet, along with many other starters for them to consider. So rest assured, David Stearns will stay diligent and really upping the ante on the Mets' ability to round out this rotation as soon as possible. But this is all while Juan Soto is still the main priority for them this offseason. And when I think of this initial pickup of Frankie Montas, I don't just think of the current connection there with the Milwaukee Brewers over this past season, which I'm sure that David Stearns heard a lot of great intel from his former colleagues there in Milwaukee on Montas and what he brings, but ultimately on this connection with even guys like Carlos Mendoza. Because even though it wasn't to a high degree, let's not forget, everybody, Carlos Mendoza was the Yankees bench boss during his short stint there, and Frankie Montas' stint during his time in the Bronx. I know it was short-lived, and he certainly didn't live up to expectations, but that went in hand with how Frankie was performing at that point in his career, how much more success he had at home in Oakland in the Coliseum versus on the road, and the Yankees certainly didn't pick up on those splits. They didn't make the proper adjustments. He dealt with ailments, and then before you know it, he was out of town. I firmly believe that Frankie, similar to Luis Severino, after having a god-awful 2023 season with the Yankees and looking stellar at times for the Mets and giving them consistency more than anything throughout the course of the 162 in 2024, we're going to see a lot of those similarities with Frankie Montas in 2025 and beyond, even if the Mets do somehow, some way bring back Luis Severino, which I honestly think he has priced himself out of a Mets reunion and will be getting an overpay elsewhere. We'll soon find out what happens on the Severino front, but I like this pickup for Frankie Montas because, again, you guys look at the average annual value. I look at an owner in Steve Cohen who's more than willing to eat a bad contract if, say, he doesn't go in their favor, and that is not something that's going to deter them from making further moves moves to add better. This isn't a Will Ponting regime where you're like, oh my god, we invested north of 20 mil AAV and a subpar starter right now. If he doesn't pan out in our pitching lab, we're screwed. We're not spending anywhere else. No, far from it. The same way that the Mets land Juan Soto at 50 plus mil average annual value, say north of 60 mil plus average annual value, they can still comfortably spend in other areas because you have the luxury of having Steve Cohen out of all owners as your owner. That's certainly never something to scoff at or be upset by. But let's double check in the chat, folks. TJ, thank you so much for that donation. Again, further thoughts here that I'd love to break down on this pickup for Frankie Montas and what the Mets are getting in him. As we saw this past season, splitting time with both the Reds and the Milwaukee Brewers, a 4.84 ERA, a 4.71 expected ERA, a 1.37 whip, a 4.38 SI ERA, roughly 150 strikeouts, and north of a 9 K per 9 to sub 4 walks per 9. And as we look at Frankie Montas throughout his career per Fangraphs that we'll be relaying here, this is coming out of, a one-start season in 2023 because of ailment there with the Yankees that we saw and nothing happened. In 2022 and 27 starts, also dealing with injury, had right around a 4 ERA with right around the same K per 9. The walks per 9 were down by a full walk plus though in 2022. His prime years that we saw with the Oakland A's came in there that we saw in 2019 and 16 starts with a north of a 10 K per 9 to just over 2 walks per 9, a 2.6 ERA to a 3.43 expected ERA. But we also saw in 2021, his final year in Oakland, north of 200 innings, the only season in his career where he surpassed 150 innings to this point. He hasn't gone anywhere close to 187 really outside this past year with 150, north of a 10 K per 9 to a sub 3 walks per 9, a 3.37 ERA to a 3.98 expected ERA. But as I mentioned before, and I'll relay again, Frankie Montas, going back to his key time during his stint there with the Oakland A's, which began his career, in which we talked about how we would have liked Frankie Montas as a potential fit for the Mets there heading into the 2021 or 2022 seasons that we talked about in the previously on the channel. Same thing with Sean Manaea before Sean ultimately went to San Diego, stunk there, then reestablished himself a bit as a starter and a reliever in San Fran, then the Mets picked him up. So funny enough, years after we have discussed these guys as key targets for the Mets out of that Oakland A's rotation, including Chris Bassett, mind you, now we have landed another former A there in Frankie Montas. And a couple things stand out as we mentioned is that sinker usage. That's something that we've seen fluctuate the past couple years. The Yankees had it all the way down, then it came all the way back up. It was the second most used pitch in his arsenal this past year with the Reds and the Brewers. But what we also saw were the adjustments from his time in Cincinnati to Milwaukee. Two fantastic pitching labs coming out of the National League, dealing with obviously a limited payroll. So that's where they have a further emphasis there in the analytics department because they know they have to each and every single time. And what stands out a lot to me is especially someone like Frankie here is his ability right away to properly adjust in a lab like what the Milwaukee Brewers threw his way. So Milwaukee, especially when facing left-handed batters, we saw a higher uptick in his usage there with the sinker, in which it was utilized well. We saw the fastball utilized more that we saw as a put-out pitch, and we also saw that slider usage pretty much completely abolished there, which makes sense against left-handed hitting in particular, and emphasizing those triple S's is important and making sure they're not overly reliant on that fastball usage, which currently ranks in right around the 70th percentile for those that aren't aware, and we see current average velocity by a starting pitcher. It's a little late, guys, and I wasn't expecting a signing tonight, so shame on me for getting a little tongue-tied here. But Frankie Montas there with that fastball, which again sits right around 95, touches high 90s, sing piece, the exact same thing. You got slider in the back pocket, which was his least used pitch over this past year. His 4 to 5 pitch mix, though. That sinker and that split is usually to the forefront of his heavy usage when he's having success. I expect the Mets and Jeremy Hefner, and now what we see here in Desi Druskel, the new Mets assistant pitching coach coming over from the Bronx of the Yankees this offseason. That's going to further help with his pitch shape usage of that arsenal. And yes, we do understand that teams in the Reds, teams in the Brewers, what do they have in common? These are teams that certainly absolutely get a lot of the best out of pitching each and every year. So it's not overly telling to see the Milwaukee Brewers to allow Montas to walk, because you have to realize that they are on a limited budget, whereas the Brewers each and every year have to try to churn out fantastic pitching talent, and then they have to usually allow them to walk when they're due for paydays, i.e. Corbin Burns, eventually Freddie Peralta, among others, because they just can't afford guys. Even with Frankie Montas pitching to north of a 5-year rate this past season, he still racked in $17 million average annual value on a multi-year deal with a player option. That just shows you how expensive this pitching market is, and how, unfortunately, how it's not going to benefit teams, even including the Mets, because of how inflated this current market is. Now, the upside with someone in Frankie Montas, at his best, he can be a true number 3 in this Mets rotation to pair with Senga, Peterson, hopefully one of a Burns, a Buehler, or someone else there in the free agent and or trade market at minimum, if not 2 more starters that they look to acquire. And at absolute worst for Frankie Montas, he essentially pitches himself out of the Mets rotation as their number 5/number 6 starter, basically in an Adrian Hauser role where he boxed himself out and is utilized as a multi-inning reliever that throws above average velocity coming out of the bullpen that you want to emphasize in certain specific matchups, either righty-righty, or if he has, say, greater success against certain left-handed hitting for whatever reason that might be in a limited split. So that is what we can expect the Mets to do with their proper usage of Frankie Montas, but what they are immediately getting is stability to their rotation for someone that, again, at a average annual value that isn't going to come any cheaper right now with how inflated this market is, and knowing that you're getting Montas that still has a lot to give at this point in his career, understands what it takes to pitch in New York, even though he didn't have the greatest success here, has the familiarity and a rapport with not only ones that we have seen in Carlos Mendoza, but also Desi Druskull/Druschel during their time and their short stint with the Yankees with each other. So there is familiarity here, just similar to a lesser degree than Luis Severino, obviously, during his connection with Mendoza, Bader, and other former Yankees going from the Bronx now to Queens. Now, again, does this mean for certain that Luis Severino is not returning the Mets? No, I don't think that's for certain at all, but do I think this lessens the opportunity, the chances for Frankie Montas to return Luis Severino to come back to the Mets? Yes, I do think it does to a certain degree. So everybody, before we deep dive a little bit more on the Baseball Savant numbers here and anything that my man Isaac Rothman, our great pitching contributor, might have to relay for us, I definitely want to hear from each and every one of you if you guys are in favor or against this 2-year, $34 million signing for the Mets. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And everything else in between. But let's answer as many of your comments as we possibly can. And Lord Rage, yes, I expect nothing less coming from you, my friend. 100%. I'm going to hype up almost every move David Stearns does because he has proven his ability to get the absolute best in so many areas out of a Mets team that had a lot of things in disarray still in a 2024 calendar season. So shame on me for having both optimism and, excitement and the Mets' ability to get their best out of pitchers and to also get the best out of certain signings, especially on the shorter term end. I'd rather them go down this route and be a team that's continuously looking fantastic at getting guys to exceed contract expectations thanks to their great pitching lab that they built in-house over the years than to be the team that always constantly has to overspend like they did for Max Scherzer, like they did for Justin Verlander, just to get grizzled vets who don't need a pitching lab but are already well past their prime. This is a turning of the tide for the Mets that are going to find themselves every single year in similarities to the Dodgers and similarities to the Astros, among many other great analytically minded organizations with an ability to spend and have a proper balance so that way that they too can get the best out of these pitchers coming off of down years, and they too can further prove, wow, we shouldn't doubt them the same way that very few should have doubted the initial pickups of Sean Manaea and Luis Severino's an off-season ago. But let's see here, everybody. Said that about that Japanese reliever from last year. Yes, let's reference the one reliever, but not emphasize anything else that transpired. Absolutely. It's almost like that same Japanese reliever in Shintaro Fujinami never pitched for the Mets last season because the Mets didn't want to take the risk, even with them investing $3 million on a split contract. That is correct. Let's see. Soto's going to Boston's. Luis, we'll worry about that should it actually happen, my man. When we find out what happens with Soto, we will break down the latest there, as we always do on the platform, folks. Let's see up here in the chat, folks. Stern sees something I don't see, so let's see what happens. Listen, Stern sees something that very few saw in Luis Severino a year ago as well. Luis Severino, what was one of the biggest problems for him entering his first year with the Mets? was his stability when it came to sleeping. The guy really struggled to sleep, similar to Dominic Smith during his time with the Mets. So what did the Mets do? Get their best to get Luis Severino to get on a proper sleep regimen. That, along with a proper diet, gave Severino a very sturdy and very steady sub-4 ERA for the season that we saw for the Mets in 2024. For Montas, yes, the stuff is a part of it. There's no denying, but it's also mentality. It's about wanting to be here. It's about his clubhouse character and his personality. All these things go a long way behind why David Stearns acquires said players. So for anyone that's going to continue to be, skeptical or pessimistic, by all means, go ahead and be that way. But the only one that looks like a schmuck, if anyone, is going to be yourself. For one, again, why not buying in on a Probo who has actually shown ability to get the best out of bargain deals, out of short-term contracts? And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't hold the Mets back from doing better moves further to add to the rotation, to add in other areas, even if that means having a DFA players throughout the course of the year because they just aren't a proper fit for the team. So I think that they give a longer leash than they need to for certain guys, especially Adrian Hauser and Jake Diekman, yes, but do I also understand how much their hands were tied in certain moments, especially with Diekman, and given their lack of lefty options in the bullpen? Yes, I think that is true as well. Everybody in the live chat, I would love to hear this, folks, in a simple yes or no. Give me, guys, do you love or hate the signing of Frankie Montas if you are in favor of one or the other? I'm going to also check on the poll that we have currently in the live chat too and go from there to see where we're at, how much of you guys are in favor versus against. If you guys haven't already, please make sure to continue smashing that like and subscribe button. It's greatly appreciated. Help us get to 350 plus likes by the end of the live show to our north of 800 live concurrent viewers. That would really mean a lot. All right, right now what we see currently in the live chat, out of how many votes do we have here? Let's double check this right here, right now. Out of this poll, we see 56% say not sure yet. Depends on other moves in regards to signing Montas at 2 years, $34 million total. 28% says love it. This is a Sevy 2.0 type signing with the upside. Most of you guys say not sure yet. Depends on other moves. And some of you guys say hate it. 15% currently. Montas is trash. Not happy about the pickup. Does not believe that even with this being a David Stearns pickup, it is not going to change the fact that Frankie Montas will not be good for the Mets at all whatsoever. What makes me think he'll spend on top shelf guys the same way he spent $325 million on a contract offer for Yamamoto last offseason, in which no one, including yourself, would be yapping if the Mets didn't have to deal with the Dodgers and the bias that Yamamoto had between growing up a Dodgers fan and having Ohtani on the club. I mean, let's start there. Let's not act ignorant to the Mets offering contracts in scenarios where they don't land the player. Just because they don't land them doesn't mean that they don't have a willingness to spend. That's such an idiotic and closed-minded thought process that, again, I understand tends to happen. We just like to focus on what we know actually happened, but didn't focus on the little details of things that almost happened that fell short. Yamamoto, $325, largest contract in MLB history for a pitcher, especially one who's never pitched in the bigs before, but let's just disregard that entirely because the Mets didn't sign him, right? Miss me with that nonsense. Let's see here. My man Ballcap in the chat says, like to see Cohen taking care of another Boris Klein. Great point, Jim. I'm glad that you brought that up. It never hurts to add another Boris Klein. And we know that there's a great connection there between Scott Boras and Steve Cohen. And this goes beyond just the current offseason negotiations that they had, which had both Boras and Soto in-house in attendance there that we saw at Steve Cohen's Beverly Hills mansion, while every other team that reportedly met with Steve Cohen, at least throughout phase one, round one of meetings that we know publicly, is that everyone else met with Boras and Soto at their preferred location versus Steve having them come to his. I think that's a clear standout and definitely one that I want to emphasize. And also, Scott and Steve are known for having a connection that goes outside of the regular season, off season. They've hung out plenty. They've had lunches, dinners, what have you together, and they obviously have built a great relationship, not only signing former Scott Boras clients, whether it be guys in Brandon Nimmo. I'm not exactly sure if Edwin Diaz was in that group, but if he was, add him to the list there. Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, if he was part of that group, list goes on and on. He has signed endless Scott Boras clients. He's fallen short on signing some, including Carlos Correa, but wasn't for a lack of effort there. And Scott has only spoken glowingly of Steve over the years since they built their relationship and great rapport together. So yeah, signing a Scott Boras client never hurts the Mets with trying to make bigger moves, say, i.e. Juan Soto, but also doesn't really impact things either. I think that's important to note as well. Chris Ferraro, great longtime follower here. Not sure on this one. Wardy trust Stearns, I guess. Again, I didn't think the Severino signing at face value made all that much sense outside of it being a bargain pickup and you're buying, you're buying low with potential high upside here. And that was the case in Luis Severino. Even some people thought it was an overpay at $13 million or so in his one-year deal. That's the exact kind of vibe that I have here with Frankie Montas. So that's exactly why I feel like that this is going to be another one of those pickups where, all right, the guy has velocity. You're going to utilize those triple S's more, sinker, splitter, and potentially slider. Let's see if David Stearns can get the best out of Frankie the way that he has with many Mets pitchers that we saw over the course of this past season. Let's see, you're going up and down the chat, everybody. Has there been any word on Alonso? No, nothing on Alonso, unfortunately. And there won't be anything on Alonso until after the Soto sweepstakes are done, more than likely. Let's see here. Guys are just, let's see here. Some Mets fans are too negative. Cohen is right. Oh, I mean, listen, there's always negative Mets fans. It's going to happen. That's always going to be the case. And we do actually have more that I want to break down for you guys on my man, Frankie Montas here. So let's do that in just 1 second, folks. Let's see. John, thank you so much for a $2 donation. John says, will Stearns sign a starter long-term or trade? I think long-term has a limit. I'd be surprised if Stearns goes 5+ years for any starter in the free agent market, which is why I'm more pessimistic than optimistic on Corbin Burnes. But at the same time, I don't know where the Mets are on the Corbin Burnes front, and there were some rumblings that started as of early today on the Burnes front that we may have to highlight as soon as tomorrow. So we'll find out, but I think the Mets are going to be more inclined to sign on those mid-level contracts, 2 to 5 years tops versus going north of 7, 8, which is what I'm sure someone in Corbin Burnes is going to be heavily looking for, rightfully so. Madeline, I'm doing fantastic. I hope you're doing great as well, my friend. Thank you so much for chiming in. Give me 1 second, everybody. Let's pull up my man Isaac Groffman because he just came out with a thread that I would love to break down for you guys. Your tweet earlier about we might hear more things about Soto in coming days. Can I expand on? There's nothing really to expand on, Mikey. Just common sense. We should be hearing more on Soto over the next 2 days. I fully expect that to be the case with how, now that we're done with the holiday weekend, as we get into now December, before we get into the big holidays there, and Hanukkah, Christmas, and everything in between. I expect us to find out more sooner than later before even winter meetings on Juan Soto. I think we'll find out more in the public eye regarding the Mets too. Okay, so my man Isaac, that you guys can check out on X at your leisure, everybody. Please do exactly that whenever you guys get the chance at Isaac Groffman here at ISAACGROFFMAN for all your pitching analysis needs, whether it's for the Mets or just pitchers across Major League Baseball in general. He's our pitching guru that we have contribute to the platform for daily pitching contributions on the platform each and every day throughout the regular season. And Isaac made an awesome, nice little quick thread to break down a bit more here, maybe beyond what I told you on the following here with Frankie Montas. So let's listen up and see what he had to say. Okay, so let's focus on one. Velocity and pitch shape, says Isaac. After leaving the Reds, his four-seam velocity went up from 95.2% with 15.2 induced vertical break to 96.2% with 15.6 induced vertical break on the Brewers. This corresponded with him raising his arm angle 7 degrees. This allowed the pitch to perform better. I mean, look at that whip percentage. I mean, the whip percentage did drastically increase, which I forgot to mention, including during his stint with the Brewers. Once he got dealt there, skyrocketed up to north of an 11 K per 9, which really helped him get to north of a 9 overall K per 9 throughout the season with the Reds there and with the Brewers. Yeah, fantastic whiff percentage that we saw there with Frankie Montas as I'm looking at with these pitches as we currently see. Let's see, just a nasty 29.2 whip percentage there on the four seam. That is simply disgusting. Haram, thank you so much for the $2 donation. Does this guy have a qualifying offer on him? No, he does not. He is good to go. We don't have to worry about giving up a comp pick, I believe, or anything like that. Isaac also notes, we'll use this pitch movement chart from Tim's stats to look at his other pitch shape changes. weaknesses. He added depth and a tick of velocity to his slider, and his whip percentage went from 28% to 36%. He killed some depth and sweep on his cutter, and its results improved. So again, all these little adjustments and these little details that we saw changing from his time from Cincinnati to Milwaukee is what the Mets and their pitching lab there with Desi and also Germany Hefner are going to try to work brilliantly with as soon as we get to spring training in Port St. Lucie this year. As you guys can see from those respective graphs, as we can highlight right here, this graph is going to show further detail on what we're seeing on the arm angle, on the degree there, with his various pitches there that we see with the four seam, with the cutter, with the sinker, that we're going to see with the slider as well. Everything that you're going to have in his mix for the most part on where it's locating, and with the horizontal break. And then we're also going to see pitch mix. Isaac Breaks how the Brewers decrease his four seam, splitter, and slider usage and increase the sinker and cutter usage. Interestingly, the sinker was his only pitch that regressed after he joined the Brewers. Its XWOBA went from 329 to 382, meaning he was allowing more hard contact with said pitch. So you have to wonder if the Mets will be able to properly adjust that sinker, something that again we saw work very well for Mets starters and relievers this past season. Sinkers, splitters, sliders, the triple S's, or sweepers, whichever one you want to label. Sliders, sleepers aren't exactly the same, but they obviously go in hand with another. Number 3, we have future improvements. I would like to keep his arm angle higher. He got more velocity and induced vertical break from that slot, just like how we saw increased ability and increased dominance from Sean Manaea when we saw the adjustments there with his arm slot to drastically change it to be more Chris Sale-esque. So making a little bit more of an adjustment to keep that arm angle higher is important, states Isaac here. Also lay off the sinker a bit, reduce its usage back to right around 10 to 15%, increase the four seam just a bit. That's something where I honestly don't think the Mets are going to do. I think they're going to have a heavy usage of his sinker next season. That four-seam fastball plays for sure. Again, it's right around in the 70th percentile in average velocity, sitting right around 95, 96 plus miles per hour there on the average velo. But that's one of those things where I really do think that given his previous success with the sinker in the past, we're going to see a further emphasis of it again here next season. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That's fine. Isaac is great with his young pitching analysis, but I'm curious if we're going to be seeing a liner to completely different like we do right now leading into the months ahead. Throw the slider, maybe even take his main, maybe even make that his main K pitch, throw his cutter more, and he just needs to make sure it's down and into lefties. Last year was up and in too often. Overall, there was a lot to like here in the adjustments, and there's a good amount of low-hanging fruit that the Mets can quickly adjust here. Pitching is always going to be expensive. Fantastic thread from our pitching contributor, Isaac Groffman. Please give him a follow on X if you guys haven't already, as he contributes to our official X platform there at the WardyNYM with 66,000 followers. And thank you guys so much for doing exactly that, along with smashing that like and subscribe button in case you guys and gals haven't already. Thank you so much for that too, folks. Really does mean a lot. But all right, now let's get back into reading a bit more here on Frankie. So, initial reactions before I'm going to answer some of your comments, and then we're going to wrap things up because I'm not going to have this be too elongated of a signing breakdown for you guys. This is a nice pickup for the Mets in general. Again, when you looked at right-handers on the market, obviously Frankie Montas wasn't the name that was jumping out at you. However, he found himself in the low-risk, high-reward upside picks. He also found himself again in the bargain shopping, if you will. I know that this is going to continue to bother fans that have a lot of pessimism with the continued lack of stability on adding starters for more than a year or two. However, there is a certain formula in doing this. I think it's important to understand that why, yes, we can overspend for starters and land them on, say, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 year deals all we want, but there's going to be repercussions to that, whereas you can get similar, if not same value from some starters out there coming off of down seasons because you have faith and trust in your pitching labs that you built within your organization. The Mets are no longer, and this is something that I really want to emphasize, everyone watching this live on a replay, the Mets are no longer an organization that's heavily reliant on other organizations' workings for a pitcher to get the best out of them. That is why the Mets had so many signings over the years that seemed like that, oh, they were great, even though this guy's a little bit of a veteran, he'll still pitch to his capabilities, and completely falls off a cliff, wondering why. It's simply because the Mets lab wasn't where it wanted to be. The Mets had great in-house success with player development for a number of years. We know that with Harvey, with Syndergaard, with DeGrom, with Wheeler, with, to a certain extent there, Steven Matz, even though it was up and down. The list goes on and on. The Mets have had their amount of internal success with player development. But when it comes to acquiring established players, players, veterans, especially guys that are almost reclamation projects. The Mets have not been that team notoriously over the years to be able to get the best out of the bunch in that category. They've always been a team that's tried in the Rick Porcellos, that's tried in the Michael Wakas, but they made Michael Wacha look like a guy whose career was almost going to end in his early 30s. Well, now he's just coming off of another strong season in Kansas City, inked a 3-year, $50+ million contract, deservedly so there in Kansas City now. And Rick Porcello essentially hasn't pitched in Major League Baseball since. It's because of other organizations getting the best out of these pitchers, and now the Mets can finally get something out of theirs, like how Aaron Loup was just stud out of nowhere for the Mets bullpen in 2021. Imagine that, but on a more consistent front where it's coming from guys that you haven't heard of, or you're like, oh, this is a guy I haven't heard of in a couple years. What's going on with him? Oh, he's really good now. We just adjusted him and made him a long reliever. Oh, we just utilized him heavily against lefties. Oh, we actually utilize him more as a spot starter. Oh, we utilize him as a 5 and die, but he's really good in this spot. Like, whatever it might be, that's where I have such a confidence level in Stearns and in this organization where I simply didn't have it in years past. Why go out of my way to freak out over a signing like this when at absolute worst, the Mets are going to cut ties with him before the damage is more done than what it already is? You know what I mean? Like, at absolute worst, this is Adrian Hauser. That is the absolute scum of the scum, scraping the floor, the absolute dumpster dive worst that you could see here, in my opinion, is that it would be an Adrian Hauser situation. He gets moved to the bullpen, and then he's still cut by midseason, right? And the upside is everything that I told you. It's a Frankie Montas that can probably pitch to right around a 3.5 to north of a 3.7, 3.8 ERA. I think that there's a great possibility Frankie Montas pitches to a sub-4 ERA for the Mets next season. I think Citi Field in that ballpark benefits him greatly. The home run rate is going to come down, whereas when you're pitching in batters ballparks there during his time in Cincinnati, and I do apologize, even though Milwaukee is great with their pitching development, that ballpark is plenty when it comes to home runs as well. It isn't hard to hit bombs out there. So that's another ballpark you add to the list. In the case of Frankie Montas' great success with the Oakland A's, what was a big part of the reason why he had great success in Oakland? Because for many, that was such a pitcher's park in the Coliseum. Montas was one of the most notorious starters when it came to the drasticness and his splits leading up until he was traded a couple years ago from the A's to the Yankees. And that's where I think the Yankees simply didn't know how to properly adjust when evaluating him. Fast forward a couple years later now, after being in a batter's park and playing with 2 different teams with great pitching labs and the NL Central, David Stearns is going to see what he can get out of, how many final drops of juice can he get out of Frankie Montas at this point in his career, and potentially some adjustments that give him better usage out of some of his pitches that we've seen at any point throughout his career during his time in Oakland, now up until the Yankees and the other teams that we just mentioned to this point. But guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Again, all my live and recurring viewers to the news. The Mets have officially signed Frankie Montas to a 2-year, $34 million deal. Until we find out more breaking news, new key reports on the Soto sweepstakes and among others. Until we have our next live show, probably a day or so from now, and individual content. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, night, evening, whenever you're watching this, folks. This is your guy, Wardy, signing out. Mets